Good afternoon and welcome to the Divorce Support Club with me, Claire Macklin, and Lev Bareko from Ian Walker Family Law. We're here to support you on your journey through separation and divorce. And our goal is to help you connect with yourself, to find calm, get clarity, take back control where you can, make really informed choices, communicate more effectively, and ultimately create a new life that you're excited to live. And we created the Divorce Support Club, I think, a couple of years ago now. And we have monthly meetings on a variety of topics with me and with various solicitors from In Walker Family Law. And we'd very much like to welcome you today to this, the December edition of the DSC. Lev and I are going to talk today about various myths that come up in relation to divorce. A lot of them come up pre-divorce, so they're things perhaps that people are frightened about or scared about, or are keeping them stuck in a position where they're afraid to take any action. Um, and so we will do this one much more as a kind of discussion. If you've got any questions as we go through, please do pop them into the Q&A, and we'll do our very best to answer those along the way. Lev, is there anything that you'd like to say by way of introduction about you? That would be great to give our viewers just a little bit of information about you.
Yeah, not a problem at all, Claire. So obviously my name's Lev Borieko. I am one of the legal advisors in the family team. I specialise in divorce and children work. And here at Ian Walker, we are a purely family law firm. And that's all we do. So we specialise in this area of law. And I'd like to think we are very good at it as well. So yes, by way of introduction, in a nutshell, that's us and me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lev. And by way of introduction, in terms of what I do, I work alongside Ian Walker and the solicitors there to provide clients with an extra holistic level of support in terms of the emotional journey really through divorce and helping you come to terms with what's happening or helping you perhaps make the decision in the first place. So the first myth that we thought we would think about is one that keeps a lot of my clients very stuck. And it's that divorce will damage my children. We hear a lot about this in the press. It can keep people really, really stuck in a marriage that they're very unhappy in. And that fear of damaging the children or fear of scarring the children for the future can really stop people from making that decision. So, and I guess with your work, Lev, you see, with your work around children, you see probably quite a lot of this. So the first thing I would say is that having spoken to my own children in preparation for this, I asked my children what their experience of divorce was. Now, mine were quite young when I got divorced, but my eldest son in particular said, I think I've learned quite a lot, Mum. I'm quite adaptable. I've learned from when I was really young that I need to remember what I need to take from your house and Dad's house. And I've learned that we can have different rules in different places. And I've learned that I can remember all my stuff. And I've learned that it's okay to have two homes. So one of the things I think is that there's also a very negative representation of divorce and children in drama and in movies and so on and so forth. I don't think that that's, in fact, I know that that's not always true. I don't buy into that at all. And I think if you can flip that on its head and think about what can my children actually learn from this, I think that's a really helpful way to perhaps turn it around. Also, I think children will model. So one of the ways in which children learn is by modeling your behaviour as their parent. So if you can begin to see this process as perhaps an opportunity for your children to see how to handle a crisis, or how to handle making difficult decisions, or how you pick yourself up after a shock, and they will be learning by watching how you do things. They will also be learning by watching how you deal with conflict. So if you are calm, if you're able to take a really deep breath before you respond, if you are able to be collected and consistent, then they will be watching and they'll be learning from that. And I don't know, do you see that in your practice, Lev?
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. I mean, I think kind of alongside kind of what you said, I think
Mm.
there is an element of focusing on the positives as well.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things we're going to touch upon a little bit later on is in relation to kind of the way that divorce can kind of occur and the various options available to you. But just because you're going through a divorce does not mean it has to be acrimonious. Not at all. With a lot of individuals that I speak to, and especially sometimes where the relationship has broken down to the extent, the fact that you are remaining in that scenario can actually be even more damaging for the children than actually having to do or doing something about that.
Mm.
But yes, I mean, there are so many different ways, and I think from kind of our perspective, and our kind of solicitors are all resolution accredited, and resolution is a body which supports amicable separations. It's about doing things in a way which can enable divorce and separation and resolution in relation to kind of contact arrangements or child arrangements to be done in an amicable and friendly way. So
Yes.
there is this big myth of it has to be a fight, and quite frankly, it 99 out of 100 times it purely, it doesn't have to be that way, and most cases aren't.
Yes. And I think one thing that I do a lot of work on with my clients, for example, is thinking about where do you want your relationship as a co-parent with your ex-partner? Where do you want that relationship to be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years even? Because, you have children together, so you're likely to have perhaps grandchildren together one day, and you're likely to be in the same spaces at things like 21st birthday parties, weddings, graduations, all of those kind of family things. Um, and if you can have a vision of where you want to get to, and then keep that in the front of your mind, that can really help to kind of keep you on track, as it were. And that very much kept me on track during my first divorce when my children were very little. I knew that I wanted at their weddings for us to be able to sit at the same table if that's what the children wanted us to do. Really important to me, and we will be able to do that. Um, I think also what really damages children is not divorce per se. Like you were saying, Lev, if you can
Mm.
do this in an amicable way and sit down together and talk through what's going to happen about the children, what damages children is when there's a big conflict around it, when perhaps there is a lot of fighting. I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying that she remembers when she was younger, her parents were divorced when she was younger, she remembers her parents arguing over who was going to have the children for Christmas Day. She can no longer remember whose house she went to on that particular year or those particular years, but she has a very vivid memory of her children, of her parents arguing about where she was going to be for Christmas Day. And that's the children witnessing those kind of arguments is much more damaging, I believe, to them than the fact that they might spend alternate years at different houses. So I think what does damage the children is conflict. And I imagine you see that too in your work in nodding.
Yes, yeah, very much so, very much so. I mean, kind of from a purely legal perspective, I think obviously the court do look into things such as obviously any conflict that the children have witnessed. So from a purely law perspective, it's always beneficial to avoid that as much as possible. And I wholeheartedly agree with you in so far as kind of your observations surrounding kind of what your client has said. It is 100% true. Um, Through kind of our work, and part of the things we do is offer mediation, and there are different types. And some of the comments that regularly come out from children is that they actually just want peace and for their parents to be getting along or being civil with each other, as opposed to the end outcome of have an extra day here or there.
Yeah,
It does need to be child focused, and I think sometimes when you're at the outset, that point can quite easily be lost, or you may lose sight of the overall goal, but try to deal with the immediate issues before you there and then. So I think it's very important to kind of ground yourself and bring yourself back to what you're trying to achieve in the whole,
Yeah,
in the long run.
absolutely. And then so creating that vision is really
Mm,
important. And if you're able to share that vision with your ex-partner and you're able to agree on it, even better, because then you've got something to bring each other back to if one or other of you kind of goes off the rails with it and loses their rag somewhat.
very much
I
so.
think it's probably important for us to think about what do you do if your ex-partner is very high conflict, and you're in a situation where whatever you do, they're going to bring a fight to you. And I think that's probably possibly quite important to consider here. So I would say in that situation, always remember that you are in control of your behavior. You can't control their behavior, what they're saying, what they're doing, but you can absolutely control how you respond. So if you can take a really deep breath and respond in a very measured way and take some of the heat out of that conflict, that's going to stand you in good stead. It may mean that you need to set some boundaries around communication. It may mean that you need to look at perhaps parallel parenting, rather than co-parenting alongside each other. You parent each of you parents in the best way you can on your own time. So there are things that you can do, even if your ex-partner is high conflict, to try and minimize the impact on the children.
Yes, no, I completely agree. Claire, I mean, is there anything, have you come across any tools or any devices which may assist individuals? Because I know some of my clients, for example, what they sometimes struggle with is the direct communication um,
Yeah. So
with their spouse.
face to face or email kind of communication, both of those can cause quite a lot of stress. So let's think about face to face first of all. If your ex-partner is very high conflict and face to face is often a problem, then my first step would be to try and keep that communication to a different format. So certainly if there's a lot of conflict, for example, when you're taking the children to their house or you're dropping them off or you're picking them up, to have some exit lines prepared. It's not appropriate to talk about this in front of the children. I will email you later. Walk away. Those kinds of things. So setting those boundaries out very, very early. Um, Also, before you go into those situations, I often advise people to imagine that they've got like a non-stick or a Teflon suit. Imagine yourself stepping into this Teflon suit, zipping it right up, and wearing it to that drop off or that meeting or whatever it is. And that Teflon suit is really clever. It repels kind of negative comments. It enables you to stay safe inside, and it gives you a little bit of time to breathe. And it has very slopey shoulders. So, nasty words, nasty comments, they not only they repel, but they also slide off. And you can also, another thing that helps is if you can, imagine or remember just one good thing about your ex, just one, before you go into that meeting with them. That may change your view of them. So just remind yourself of one good thing before you go into that meeting. And also try and frame the conversations that you're having. So, you might introduce it with, right, we're here today to talk about X. I want to make sure that we do this in a way that's civil and I don't hesitate to use the word friendly, civil and polite. Um, and then you can come back to that later. If it comes not that, you can say, I wanted this to remain civil and polite. I think we probably need to walk away now. So putting those boundaries in place, I think if you're face to face. Over email, for example, when an email comes in, that might be very stressful. So take a really deep breath before you open anything. Um, Perhaps open things, have a time when you do that, so that you're not opening emails from your ex-partner at 11 o'clock at night just before you're going to go to sleep, for example. And I always say to my clients, use the BIF method of communication. So be brief, be informative, be firm, and be fair. Not emotional. So don't share all your emotions about something, but try and be as brief and informative, firm and fair as possible. Um, I often also say to my clients, a really good idea is to print out that email when it comes in, put it in front of you, get a black pen and put a line through anything that doesn't require a response. For example, there might be some personal attacks in there. Put a line through those that you don't need to reply to those. And then get a highlighter and just highlight any questions that do need answering. And then when you reply, you just focus on those bits. So you're taking control of your side of communication in all of those examples. And that's what I think is massively important. If you can behave the best you can, take control of your part in the communication, and take the heat out of some of that conflict. Because it's like a cycle. And if one of you steps out of it, it's very hard for the other one to keep that conflict going if the other person is not engaging with it.
Yeah, to be honest, I completely agree with you. I think one of the things that solicitors do, and obviously if it can be incorporated by individuals, is that degree of objectivity.
Yeah.
We as solicitors obviously are not subjectively tied to your matter, and hence we're trained to kind of diffuse situations and avoid addressing elements that need not be addressed.
Yeah.
I find it with individuals, especially, it's trying to avoid using negative terminology,
Mm.
anything such as, getting into the realms of, well, you did this or you don't do that, only tends to kind of get the other side to put the defenses down, and things
Yeah.
escalate it in that way.
It's
The
the
only
you never and you always.
Yeah.
Those statements, try and avoid those. And actually try and avoid statements that are you altogether. Try and own what it is for you. So I rather than you is a helpful tip as well. Sorry to interrupt you there, Lev.
No, it's all right. Not a problem at all. The other thing that I think has been helpful to a lot of my clients, especially if you're struggling with the kind of direct communication, whether that's in person or email, vice versa, there are a lot of parenting apps that are out there. Different apps offer different things, to put it that way, but they can be very helpful insofar as I've come across apps that have things such as, for example, a joint calendar. Some of my clients struggle with, well, little Rosie had ballet on Tuesday, and for example, he didn't take her. And the father might say, well, I didn't really know about it. The use of a joint calendar means that both individuals have an input and have a central point, as opposed to having to correspond and litigate and clarify and so on and so forth. So they are there, and they are very, very helpful. And I think if your partner can be, if they get aggressive or they use insulting language, a lot of these parenting apps have filters insofar as they won't let an individual post anything that's things such as swear words in correspondence. It will automatically flag up and stop them sending it to you. So things of that nature are also helpful, and it can assist with communication.
Absolutely. And I think, going back to the myth that we were talking about, that divorce will damage children, if you can keep your communication under control and if you can keep the conflict out, then that is going to enable you to absolutely minimize that damage. I hesitate to use that, but because I don't think they have to be damaged at all. But yeah, keeping the conflict out of your communication is the key. The next myth that I wanted to talk about was that and that I hear quite often, is that you need to stay in the marriage for the sake of the children. And I think that there are a few things that I often I raise with my clients here. Um, the first question I would ask them is, what are your children learning about relationships from the model of the relationship that you have as their parents? Because statistics show that, children they learn from what you're modeling to them. They're likely to repeat what you're modeling to them in the future. And so the second question linking on from that would be, if your child was in this relationship like this in their 20s or 30s or 40s, what would your advice to them be? Would you advise them to stay, or would you advise them to leave, or would you advise them to work on it? Think about that, because what you model, they will probably repeat as they grow up and get older. And I don't know if you've got anything to add to that one, but if not, we'll move on to the next myth.
No, I think your comments are wholly valid on that one.
Okay. So the next myth that we were going to talk about is that divorce is somehow shameful and that I will be judged for being divorced. And I see this an awful lot. And in fact, I've felt this myself. I've been divorced twice now. And my second divorce was at my instigation. And I was very afraid of feeling judged by this, particularly because I was working as a divorce coach. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm a divorce coach, you can't stay married. People are going to really judge me for this. Actually, what I've realized is, well, two things. First of all, is the people who care about you don't judge you on that level, and they just want you to be happy. And the second thing is that that judgment actually often comes from within. So it was me judging myself and then assuming that other people would look in and judge me in the same way. And I think that's true of a lot of judgment, fear of judgment. It's actually something that you feel inside yourself that you're worried that other people might feel too. In actual fact, I haven't felt that feeling of being judged by anybody. It's been about 18 months now, since I separated from my second husband. So the question might be, am I judging myself here? And what do I need to heal within myself to move beyond that? Um, I think also you can start to tell, it depends how you tell the story to yourself. So I talk quite a lot with clients about how are you telling the story of what's happening to you? Are you telling a story that makes you feel better, or are you telling a story that increases that sort of self judgment? And that's really important, I think. And when I often get clients to think about different ways that they could tell the story of what's happening to them and try it out on different people and see what responses you get. So I always tell the example of, when my first husband left, I could have told a story which was my husband left, it's been dreadful, it's been horrific, the children are really going to suffer, etc. I chose not to tell that story. I chose to tell a story which was my husband left, and yes, it was horrific for a while and it was painful. But then I started to pick myself up. I learned how to mow the lawn. I learned how to make a barbecue. I learned how to do all those things that my ex-husband had done before. And I started to feel proud of myself. And when you tell that story, people react to you in a very different way, a very different way. And I think that the other thing I would say is that marriage as an institution obviously goes back a very long way. Um, and as humans, we now live much, much longer than when marriage was first created. So 100 years ago, you might have lived until you were, I don't know, 45, 50, whatever. Now we all live until we're maybe in our 80s and we have a much longer lifespan. And actually, the person who was right for you in your 20s may not be the person who's right for you in your 40s or your 60s. And that's okay. So I think giving ourselves permission to notice that we may have changed, that they may have changed, that the situation may have changed, and what we need may have changed. It can be really freeing. So I don't know what are your views about divorce and shame, Lev?
Yeah, I think we live in a society, especially in the current era, where, in the one hand, divorce and separation is rife. The kind of positive element to that, if there can be positive, is that it's not uncommon.
Mm,
Obviously, yes, if a relationship can work and divorce can work, if a marriage can work, great. And I think, as solicitors, one of our first objectives is trying to make that relationship work if it can. I think with a lot of individuals that I see, I think taking a step back and say, do my family, do my friends actually want to see me and me be happy? I think a lot of friends and family, that's what they truly want. And
mm,
the people that matter to you want you to be happy in your life, as opposed to bringing any judgment upon you for any of your actions. So I think, generally speaking, in our climate, I think it's not something that I think that people should feel ashamed about,
mm.
because I think the underlying elements are, generally, friends and family want you to live a happy life. And if a marriage hasn't worked out, then so be it.
I
I
guess
think.
that also links into that myth that divorce is a failure somehow.
Mm,
And actually, this isn't one we were planning to discuss, but as it's come up, um, divorce doesn't necessarily mean that that marriage is a failure. There may have been beautiful, wonderful things that came out of that marriage, like children, or you may have wonderful memories. And actually, just because you're now separated or divorced doesn't mean that those memories and those things that you valued in that marriage doesn't mean that they disappear or that they didn't happen. So sometimes at the end of marriage, I think it's sometimes worth noticing the things that actually you did value in that and paying your respects to those in a way. So I don't buy into divorce being a failure either, actually.
yeah, no, completely agree.
Brilliant. So the next one we were going to look at, um, if you're unsure about whether to stay or go, given your maybe fears around some of those myths, I thought it would be useful just to highlight maybe 2 or 3 questions that perhaps people could be asking themselves. So the first question would be, and these kind of things maybe to journal about, um, how will I feel in 5 years if I stay and nothing changes? So have a think about that question. Put yourself in your own shoes in 5 years' time. Nothing's changed. How does that feel? And then ask yourself, what choices do I have? So, for example, you might have the choice to accept that nothing's going to change and it's going to feel that way. And that's fine. That's a perfectly valid choice to make. You could accept and stay. You could leave. You could separate. You could trial separate. You could separate permanently. Um, you could suggest that you go to some kind of marriage guidance, marriage counselling kind of thing. Or you could think, what could I change in myself that might make a difference here? So you could think, okay, what am I prepared to do? What changes am I prepared to make that might shift things? Because sometimes when one person makes a change, there's a knock-on effect and it actually changes the whole dynamic. So what will I feel in 5 years if nothing changes? And what choices does that then give me? And then the second question would be, what am I most afraid of? And those are some of the things that we've been talking about today for a lot of people. What am I most afraid of? Be really honest with yourself. And then ask yourself some supplementary questions like, how could I overcome that fear? And what information do I need to learn more about that? Who could I turn to help with this? And then also, what's the worst thing that could happen? And also, what's the best thing that could happen? And perhaps take some time to really think about those questions in terms of thinking about whether you're unsure whether to stay or to go. I just thought that would be helpful to throw in at this point. A third one would probably be if your friend, your closest friend, was in this marriage right now, what would you advise them to do? And maybe have a think about those 3 questions. And of course, remember you don't have to make any decisions quickly. I don't know anybody who had made a decision to separate or get divorced quickly. Even if there's a light bulb moment that makes that decision suddenly very clear, there has always been a thought process going on in the background, sometimes for many years. So, I think the next myth that we wanted to talk about was something that you've alluded to already, Lev, which is that divorce is always high conflict and that it can't be dignified. So what are your views on that one?
Yeah, um, I think a lot of kind of divorces that hit the news and the ones that kind of people read about and see about are tend to be the really high net worth, high conflict scenarios. And I think to a certain degree that really portrays a wrong image of kind of what we're trying to do. Obviously, this year we've had the introduction of a no-fault divorce, which is a step in the right direction in relation to kind of where we, I think, as a nation are going. I think it recognizes kind of current values that sometimes you separate not because of something, person A or person B has done. It's just, sometimes people grow apart. And in scenarios of that nature, it's about doing things amicably as possible. And what we encourage, so I've mentioned this again, but I think it's prudent, that there is a group called Resolution, and a lot of family lawyers are Resolution members, and we take a code to try to progress things in a civil and amicable manner for people. So, you know, in my experience, I would say 95% of all divorces aren't high conflict. And even the ones that there are tensions, there are means and ways of alleviating that, the need to have a conflict over a given matter. It is okay to have different opinions on a given element, and that's fine. I think us as human beings, we all have a different perspective, even down to law, you know, solicitors, judges, barristers, we can formulate a different view on a given set of facts. It's just about also kind of controlling how those views are expressed, which I think is important, which I think links into your point of, you know, you can only control your actions. So just make sure that the actions that you portray across are civil, sensible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really important point, I think, and a question that I often say to my clients, you know, to ask yourself in that moment of high emotion, which is when you're more likely to say something that you perhaps might regret later, is there's a couple of things. First of all, to remember the mantra: stop, breathe, think, respond. Because it's very easy to respond through that kind of fog of high emotion rising, whether that's anger or whether that's frustration or whether that's sadness, whatever it is. To stop and breathe, because that's an emotional response that's coming from a place in your brain that responds to what it perceives as threat. And it puts you into fight, flight, freeze. So if you can stop and breathe, you can calm that emotional response, and you can bring oxygen back to your brain, and then bring your logical brain back on side. And then the question then to ask yourself is what I'm about to say or do going to take me nearer to where I want to get to? Going back to that, say that vision of parenting, for example, or that vision of where you want your relationship to get to, or is it going to take me further away? And to kind of take that step back to really think about what it is you're about to do or say, and 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 really take control of your part. You can't control the other person's part. So you can't control what they say to you, what they do, how they respond to you, but you can absolutely control what you send back and what you say back. And like we were saying earlier, you know, even if your partner is very argumentative or very high conflict or very difficult, you can be dignified. And I remember in my first divorce, thinking I had to be dignified, like, or dignity at all times, almost emblazoned across my forehead in my own mind, to remind myself that that's how I wanted to behave. And I knew that if I behaved in that way, then I would be able to feel proud of myself when I got to the end of the process. And that was really important for me, and is a massive driver in my business, because like you, I'm also I'm a different sort of member of Resolution. I'm an associate member of Resolution. And so for me, it's really important to help my clients to navigate this journey with dignity, and with confidence, whatever it is that they might face. So divorce, the next myth is that divorce is either very high conflict, or you can just do it yourself and it's really easy. And I think there are lots and lots of other options, and perhaps Lev could talk us through some of the other options that lie between the extremes of extremely high conflict, horrible court case, and DIY divorce. I can fill in a couple of forms and it's all done.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something I can assist with. I think yes, I think kind of part of the perception is it's either A or B. In kind of what we do, and I give this advice to a lot of my clients, there is, in my eyes, there is no set way of doing this. Everyone will have their own feelings in relation to how they want something to progress, or in what type of a scenario they feel most comfortable. At the end of the day, what I say to individuals, it's, you know, this is ultimately your separation, and you have to be comfortable in any way that you wish to proceed. So some of the different kind of ways between kind of resolving finances can include things such as mediation. So mediation is effectively where you attend sessions with a trained mediator. Most trained mediators are either solicitors or barristers who will assist and guide individuals through the process of discussing and negotiating on given issues, and whether those issues are children, whether those issues are money. I've had clients who've gone to mediation over a pet, for example, and it's a helpful way, I think, for individuals who feel that, you know, they don't necessarily need legal assistance at any given stage, but they just need a little bit of assistance from someone to guide negotiations. Because I think some of my clients struggle with the idea of having to either sit in a room with their spouse or try to negotiate over correspondence, you know, something of that nature is helpful. I think then we go into the realms of, obviously, you can have solicitor-led mediation where, you know, if you do want your solicitor to be present with you to provide you advice and guidance, that's also possible. Moving into the realms of kind of solicitors, there are so many different ways of discussing and negotiating, and again, it is surrounding what you're most comfortable with. So there is kind of a standard kind of correspondence. You know, some individuals feel like they need time to sit and process any given positions, and you know, if you're that type of individual, then kind of discussions through correspondence is great, because you can have a letter, you can have some time to think, really consider your options in relation to that. Other people prefer to kind of say, look, you know, I'd rather try to sit around a table and see what can be done. So, you know, most solicitors, including us, you know, we do offer roundtable meetings where we effectively get together and try to negotiate or reach an agreement on a given point. Roundtable meetings does not necessarily mean we all sit around a table, but it's just that we're all in the same building. So I've conducted roundtable meetings with, for example, clients where they don't want to see their spouse, but they want to be in a similar location to see if we can speed up the process. So, and that can work. You know, we have 2 separate rooms, and negotiations go in that nature. I think another process which I personally don't feel gets shouted about enough is known as collaborative law. And the idea behind collaborative law is that each individual has a solicitor, but the purpose of collaborative law is about trying to work towards an end goal. So collaborative law works in the way of meetings. So what you do is you get together in a meeting, so far as you and your solicitor and your spouse and his solicitor, and you work towards an overall goal. So it's more of an amicable way to try to reach the overarching principle without having to litigate as such. There are things such as, for example, private hearings. I'm not sure if it's a fairly new concept, which I think a lot of people aren't aware of, but sometimes I have clients where, there are polar opposites. And you think, well, how do we bridge a gap between these 2 positions? So there are things such as private hearings where you can have an individual to adjudicate and give you their opinion on a given matter. So they're generally in financial terms known as private FDRs, where you can pick your own judge. The big benefit of private FDRs, I think, as opposed to going to court, is that you have a control over, for example, who you would like to give you an opinion. You've got control over the location. You've got control over time. The ball is very much in the party's court. And I think leading from private FDRs, we can go into arbitration where as opposed to going to court, your case is put to an arbitrator and a decision can be made, which is then binding upon both parties. And last but most definitely not least, is going to court itself. I say to a lot of my clients, I see court as an well, sometimes the last resort. I prefer not to go to court because, in my opinion, generally speaking, court is an expensive process, and it is a very stressful process. If we don't have to go down that route, we won't. But on the flip side of the coin is the court is there for a reason, and I think, as much as we don't want to go down that route, sometimes that is the right route to choose for individuals so that a line can be drawn in the sand.
Mm.
Um,
Sorry, I was just going a sort of slightly supplementary question actually to that, in terms of sometimes if you've got a couple where one party is just not coming to the table, they're not
mm,
filling in their Form Es, they're not producing the documents they need to, they're being very sort of difficult in terms of engaging in the process. I've had quite a few clients who the court process is a tool that you can use to bring that person into the process. And I think lots of clients don't realise that even once you've started the court process off, you can settle. You don't have to then follow it right the way through all the different hearings to the very bitter end. You can agree at an earlier stage.
yeah,
I think that's
very,
possibly another myth to bust, isn't it? That once you start the court process, you have to see it through.
very much so. Very much so. I mean, I advise my clients that the court process just provides them structure.
Mm.
The court directs that certain elements have to be done, such as a Form E, which is the disclosure element, which then allows individuals to go to a negotiating table. And yes, I think, up to the final hearing, for example, if an agreement can be reached, it will be reached. And the whole court process is tailored around trying to encourage people to reach an agreement by themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had cases which have reached settlement 5 minutes before we walked into a final hearing. So just to give listeners an idea of how close it can go, it can go that far. So
Mm.
yes, it's all tailored around trying to reach an agreement, but it has a purpose there for it as well. I think the only other little element that I thought would be helpful to kind of address is in relation to this one lawyer, one couple.
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
I mean, Claire, have you spoken to any individuals who have thought around this before I ramble off in relation to what it is?
I think I've had some conversations with some clients around the one lawyer, one couple thing, where the lawyer is acting for both of you. And I think it probably only works in a small number of cases, perhaps, and for certain types of couples where there isn't a lot of or where they're both able to communicate with each other. I don't know if that's right. I haven't had any clients who've actually used the one lawyer, one couple solicitor led service yet. I'm still waiting for the first one. It would be
No,
interesting when it happens.
yeah, very much so. I mean, the idea of two individuals having a single lawyer, for example, that in itself, in the grand scheme of law, is not new. For example, when two people buy a house, you only have one conveyancer. Okay, but the fact, when we look in a family context, it is something that has been developed. I think, again, coming back to resolution are they're going to soon be launching something that's known as Resolution Together. And it's this idea of having one lawyer. Now, the one lawyer concept can work well, but ultimately, a single lawyer has to look at the overall picture. If there is conflict between a couple on any given points, the difficulty for that lawyer is that obviously they can't keep both parties' best interests at mind. So yes, it is a concept that can work, but it has to be around a scenario where there is very, very little conflict between
Mm.
individuals, and they need, for example, a solicitor to guide them through the legal process and explain the necessary stages to them. So
Yes.
we at Ian Walker, we are looking, and obviously a lot of our solicitors are resolution members. So we are looking to tailor a service, or we will be tailoring a service once Resolution Together is launched, and I think that's expected around spring of next year.
Yeah.
So it's something that's coming, and again, I think it falls within the bracket of it. You know, it's trying to tailor a service in relation to how you'd like to proceed.
Absolutely. And I get, you know, in terms of that one lawyer, one couple service, I can see that working alongside a coach or somebody who's going to help you in
Mm,
terms of that communication strategies will probably be a really valuable addition to perhaps that, you know, working through that process with one lawyer between you. Thank
very
you, Lev.
much so.
I think hopefully what we've made really clear there to people watching is that, you know, there are so many different options. And going back to your point that you made right at the start, you know, all divorces are different because all people are different and all relationships are different. And so working out what's the best route for you is really important. And one just little thing to add to that is I would always advise my clients not to listen to potentially their friends who say, well, when I got divorced, I went to this lawyer because etc., etc., etc. Because actually their divorce isn't your divorce, their ex-partner isn't your ex-partner. And sometimes you can go down a road that doesn't work for you by following that advice. I would always advise go and check out and find a lawyer that you really like and that you click with and that you feel rapport with, and that you trust to have your best interests at heart. Following on from that, Lev, there's also this myth that you know that you see quite often in some of the tabloid newspapers about people getting quickie divorces. Um, is that possible?
It's a little bit of a myth, and I think there is a lot of companies out there that sell the myth of a quickie
Mm,
divorce. Um, the quick answer is it really depends on what your perception of quick is. That there are legislative kind of wait periods that are built into divorce, which no solicitor, barrister, or judge can, quite frankly, overcome.
mm,
Generally speaking, a divorce from start to finish will usually take around 6 months. And the reason behind that largely is through the new legislation, there is a 20-week stay period. So this is a period that from when you make an application for divorce to when you can apply for your conditional order, which used to be called the decree nisi. That 20-week period is to allow an individual or couples to really think about whether this is what they want to do. That period can't be hastened up. And then after the 20-week period, after the conditional order is granted, there is another period of 6 weeks to wait before a final application can be made. So yes, I mean, even if you're the most keenest and you do things promptly, realistically it's not going to happen any sooner than 26 to 28 weeks.
yeah, brilliant. That's really helpful. And the dates. So you issue your application, you get your date for when, and it's the earliest you can put your conditional order in, isn't it? I've had clients ask me recently, is that a deadline or is that a starting point? And that's the earliest point. You don't have to submit your conditional order at that point or your application for a conditional order.
Very much
Probably
so.
worth clearing that up as well. Okay. Is it possible? I've had clients ask me this as well. Is it possible to do the dissolution? Because there are sort of the dissolution of the marriage is the paperwork part, and then you've got the finances part and the children part if you have children. Can you do the dissolution paperwork yourself and work with a solicitor around the other two strands? Is that possible to do as well?
Yeah, very much so. I think us as solicitors, we're here to provide you assistance where you require it. The new legislation that has come in and obviously has introduced a new portal So the divorce process is online.
Mm.
Obviously, some individuals feel that they're happy to do, for example, the divorce side of things themselves, but obviously use us for assistance in relation to resolving the finances, or obviously assist with trying to reach an agreement in relation to children. We are here to assist you in any way that you see fit. And again, it's about what you need as a client ultimately from us. I say to some individuals, for example, yes, I'm here, and we're happy to do all of the day-to-day management of your case. Alternatively, if you want to come for a meeting for an hour or 2 hours to get advice on a given point, let's say between mediation, then that's also fine. You know, that there is no box that you have to fit in.
Yeah,
Um,
so it could be quite flexible in terms of, there are some people who may be able to run, do quite, perhaps you're somebody who can actually negotiate with your ex-partner over the kitchen table, as it were, and then you come in for check-ins and so on and so forth. So it can be very flexible. It's whatever the client needs.
Very much so. Very much so. I
Good.
think I think one of the things that I think maybe is a little bit of a myth, and I see this quite often, is that individuals will say, "Well, once I'm divorced, that's it, right?" So, with when we look at divorce and finances, even though the two are tied to each other, okay, that they are also separate insofar
Mhm.
as you can be divorced insofar as you are free to remarry somebody else, but you would still be financially tied to your former spouse at that stage until there is a financial order which gives you that break. Um, I think it's quite interesting that there was a case in the papers around, it was about 7 to 10 years ago. And I think for the really eager ones, they can look it up. It's called Wyatt and Vince. And that involved a couple who divorced, and at the time they didn't have any assets to resolve, and hence they only did the divorce. And then in that specific case, the husband went on to become quite successful. And then obviously the former wife made a financial application a number of years down the road. So I think that case does serve as a bit of a warning for a lot of people insofar as, even if you don't have substantial assets at any given one stage, unless you do have that financial order, it does mean a financial application can be made at any point in the future.
Yeah, so that could come into play. You start a successful business, you win the lottery. Yeah, all of those things. Actually, it's really sensible to get your finances sewn up and finalised, and before you move on to the rest of your life.
Very much so. Very
So I
much
think
so.
hopefully we have busted quite a few divorce myths there. I think if anybody watching has any questions at all that they'd like to ask to either myself or to Lev, please do email either of us. My email address is claire@clairemacklincoaching.com. And Lev, what's yours? Would you mind saying to everyone?
Yeah, no problem. So it's Lev Borieko at familylawandmediation.co.uk. If it assists, Ian Walker, we do offer a free 30-minute consultation.
Mm,
So you can drop me an email or you can give our firm a ring, and we can, we can assist on that front.
fantastic. Thank you very much. So all that remains is me to say thank you very much for watching. And we will see you next month at the next DSC meeting. Thank you very much.